Combat Simulation. Part 1. The Rehearsal Grounds. The war was a shapeshifter. For the raw recruits pouring into training camps from the frozen plains of North Dakota and the sun-baked valleys of California, it was an abstraction, a blur of headlines, propaganda reels, and the grim, determined faces of their fathers who remembered the Argonne. They learned to shoot, to march, to obey. They practiced bayonet drills on straw-stuffed sacks and threw practice grenades into painted circles. But the landscape of their training was stubbornly, inescapably American. The pine barrens of North Carolina, the dusty mesas of Texas, the rolling hills of Tennessee. It bore no resemblance to the cobblestone alleys of a French village, the dense, dark hedgerows of Normandy, or the concrete and rubble canyons of a German industrial city. This disconnect haunted the men tasked with turning these boys into soldiers. Lieutenant Colonel John Hargrove, a veteran of the trenches in 1918, now served in the Army's fledgling Training and Doctrine Command. He remembered the catastrophic, bloody learning curve of urban warfare in the Great War. The death traps of blind corners, the murderous fields of fire from second-story windows, the way a single well-placed machine gun in a cellar could stall a battalion. He looked at the eager, terrified faces of the new draftees and knew with cold certainty to send them into a European town or a Pacific jungle stronghold without proper preparation was not training. It was premeditated slaughter. Thus was born the idea of the mock-up. If the war wouldn't come to the training grounds would conjure the war. The order came down from the highest levels. Build replicas, not just crude facades, but immersive, full-scale environments where the geography of fear could be taught before it was ever encountered in anger. The first and most ambitious project rose from the Mojave Desert at Fort Irwin, California. They called it Little Germany. Hargrove was assigned as its first commander. Under the relentless sun, a battalion of Army engineers, aided by a curious contingent of Hollywood set designers recruited from Warner Brothers and MGM, began to build a ghost town. They didn't have blueprints of Berlin or Cologne. They had intelligence reports, tourist photos, and aerial reconnaissance. The goal was not architectural perfection, but tactical fidelity. They laid out a central platz with a cobblestone fountain, dry, fed by a hidden pipe. They erected half-timbered facades with authentic-looking window boxes, empty. They built a rat house, City Hall, with a clock tower that had no clock, a guest house with a painted sign for beer, and rows of attached stucco houses with steep, pitched roofs designed to shed snow, a surreal sight in 110-degree desert heat. The materials were cheap lath, plaster, and chicken wire, but the effect was chillingly convincing from 100 yards out. They added the details that would matter. Narrow alleys that dead-ended, walled courtyards perfect for ambushes, interconnected basements, and sewers large enough for a man to crawl through. They even had a section of bomb-damaged buildings, with carefully crafted rubble piles and false perspectives to simulate shell holes. For Private First Class Leo Finney from Iowa, arriving at Fort Irwin for his final month of training before shipment overseas, Little Germany was a shock. One morning, they were on a standard desert maneuver. That afternoon, his platoon was ordered to clear the town. As they advanced in a tactical column, the familiar browns and tans of the desert vanished. They were suddenly in a shadowy, claustrophobic alley, the sounds of their own boots echoing off the plaster walls. It felt alien, menacing. From a second-story window, a training NCO, playing the role of a German defender, opened up with a blank-firing machine gun. The sound, magnified by the enclosed space, was deafening. Leo froze, his training deserting him. He didn't know where to look, where to move. A whistle blew. "Finney, you're dead. A rifleman in that cellar across the street just drilled you. You're presenting a full silhouette. Now get out of the kill zone and let your squad move." It was brutal, repetitive, and invaluable. They practiced room clearing with empty weapons, learning the deadly choreography of threshold evaluation, corner pieing, and communication under stress. They learned to use bazookas against strong points, reinforced sections of wall, to throw grenades into upper windows, to use smoke to cross open squares. They fought in the mock-up by day and by night. They learned the hard way about mouse-holing, the practice of blowing holes through interior walls to move through a building without going into the deadly street. The plaster dust choked them, the chicken wire tore their uniforms, and the NCO's critiques were merciless. But with each iteration, the paralyzing fear diminished. The strange became familiar. The unpredictable maze became a series of solved problems. Leo learned that the key to staying alive in a city wasn't bravery, but a kind of grim spatial arithmetic, constant assessment of cover, angles, and movement. Little Germany was a brutal school, but its lessons were written in imaginary blood, saving the real kind for the streets of Aachen and Nuremberg. Part 2. The Jungle in the Caribbean. While Little Germany taught the war of stone and right angles, a different, more organic nightmare was being constructed 1,000 miles to the southeast. On the island of Puerto Rico, at the vast Camp Santiago training base, the U.S. Army was building Little Japan. The enemy here was not the ordered, if treacherous, geometry of European cities, but the chaotic, hidden lethality of the Pacific Theater. The project was led by Major David Chen, a second-generation Chinese-American from San Francisco who had studied engineering at Berkeley. He pored over after-action reports from Guadalcanal and Tarawa, interviews with the few traumatized survivors, and captured Japanese manuals on fortification. The Japanese defense doctrine was a horrifying revelation. They didn't hold ground. They became the ground. Their bunkers were not standalone pillboxes, but part of a deep, interlocking, and invisible network, often carved directly into hillsides or concealed by dense jungle. Under Major Chen's direction, engineers and local Puerto Rican laborers transformed a swath of tropical forest into a diabolical puzzle. They didn't build a village. They built a defensive complex disguised as one. Using coconut logs, corrugated iron, and poured concrete, they constructed bunkers that were virtually impervious to small arms and mortars. The firing slits were narrow, giving a minimal target. They were dug into the sides of hills, their roofs covered with 2 feet of earth and replanted with living sod and fast-growing vines. From 50 feet away, it was an innocuous vegetated slope. From 5 feet away, it was a steel-reinforced door to hell. They connected these bunkers with a maze of deep, covered trenches and tunnels, some large enough to move men and light weapons through. They built spider holes, tiny one-man foxholes with camouflaged lids, where a soldier could hide submerged up to his neck, emerge to fire a burst or throw a grenade, and disappear again. They constructed false bunkers meant to draw fire and reveal American positions, while the real killing zones were covered by hidden machine guns with intersecting fields of fire. They even replicated the deadly innovation of the knee mortar, the Type 89 grenade discharger. Positions, tucked behind reverse slopes, for the Marines and Army infantry units rotated through Camp Santiago for jungle warfare training. Little Japan was a descent into a green, humid purgatory. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, rotting vegetation, and their own sweat. The constant buzz of insects was punctuated by the cries of unseen birds. And everywhere, everywhere, was the feeling of being watched. Private First Class. William Billy O'Hara, a kid from the asphalt jungles of Brooklyn, found this environment more terrifying than the plaster streets of Little Germany. In the desert, you could see the enemy, or the mock-up of one. Here, the enemy was the landscape itself. During his first exercise, his platoon was ordered to take a hill. They advanced through seemingly empty jungle. Suddenly, blank fire erupted from a wall of greenery to their front. They hit the dirt. Then fire came from their left flank. Then from a hole in the ground behind them. Men were killed by opponents they never saw. The dead had to lie where they fell, sweltering and humiliated, as the living tried to figure out where the fire was coming from. It was Major Chen who oversaw the after-action reviews. He would lead the frustrated, angry men to the bunker that had decimated them, showing them the flawless camouflage, the covered approach trench they had walked right over, the spider hole that had been 5 feet from their point man. The Japanese soldier is taught to die in his position, Chen would say, his voice calm. He will not retreat. He will not surrender. He will wait until you are 10 feet away. Your job is not to charge his gun. Your job is to find it, blind it, and kill it without ever letting it see you. They learned new tactics. The meticulous, slow use of covering fire and movement, the vital importance of flanking, the use of Bangalore torpedoes and flamethrowers to clear bunkers, the brutal necessity of using grenades to clear every hole, every crevice before moving on. The training was so realistic it sometimes turned tragic. Live grenades were used in designated demolition areas. There were accidents, injuries, and a handful of fatalities. The commanders knew the risk, but they weighed it against the casualty reports coming from Peleliu and Iwo Jima, where entire companies were chewed up in hours by defenses they were utterly unprepared for. Better to lose a man in the controlled, instructional hell of Puerto Rico than a whole squad in the real one. Billy O'Hara, after 3 weeks in Little Japan, was no longer a boy from Brooklyn. He moved through vegetation with a predatory caution, his eyes constantly scanning not for men, but for the unnatural straight line, the patch of earth that was too smooth, the ripple in the greenery that could be a firing slit. He had learned to see the invisible. It was a horrible kind of wisdom, but it was the only kind that would keep him alive. Part 3. The Shadow War and its Legacy. The mock-up towns and jungle strongholds were more than just elaborate training grounds. They were theaters for a silent shadow war of intelligence and innovation. Both Little Germany and Little Japan became laboratories where tactics and technology were tested in brutally honest conditions. At Fort Irwin, as the war in Europe progressed, Little Germany evolved. Intelligence from the Italian campaign and the breakout from Normandy provided new details. Engineers added sewers based on the ones GIs had fought through in Cherbourg. They simulated the reinforced concrete Panzerstellungen, tank bunkers, encountered in the Siegfried Line. They even experimented with the effects of new weapons. A section of the town was periodically subjected to live fire tests with recoilless rifles and early shaped charge munitions to see what it took to breach typical European construction. The data gathered: how much explosive was needed to collapse a load-bearing wall. The effective range of a flamethrower in an enclosed courtyard was fed directly to ordnance departments and training manuals. The Hollywood set designers, it turned out, were also masters of controlled demolition and pyrotechnics. They helped rig the town for these destructive tests with a chilling cinematic precision. In Puerto Rico, Major Chen's work took a darker, more psychological turn. Understanding that the fear of the unseen was as potent a weapon as the machine gun itself, he incorporated passive defense lessons. Trainees would enter a seemingly cleared bunker, only to have a dead Japanese soldier, a Puerto Rican role player, suddenly come to life behind them with a training knife. They learned to always check for false backs in spider holes, for trapdoors in bunker floors. They were taught the grim signs of a booby-trapped corpse or a rigged souvenir. The goal was to instill a level of paranoid, operational vigilance that would become second nature. The most profound impact, however, was on the men themselves. The mock-up served as a brutal equalizer and a vital confidence builder. For Leo Finney, the chaotic, terrifying first assault on Little Germany's rat house was a distant memory by the time his regiment reached the outskirts of the German city of Jülich. As they moved from shell-shattered house to house, his squad moved with a methodical, unhurried rhythm. "Mouse hole to the left," he'd say, his voice calm. "Cover that staircase, grenade up." The plaster dust of Fort Irwin was replaced with real brick and mortar dust, the blank fire with the real, ear-splitting crack of German Mausers. But the spatial puzzle was the same. His muscles remembered the drills. The fear was still there, cold and metallic in his mouth, but it was overlaid with a layer of practiced competence. He wasn't a farm boy in a foreign nightmare. He was a soldier doing a job he had rehearsed. He survived Jülich, and later, The brutal street fighting in Cologne, where the ghost of Little Germany lived in every shattered block. For Billy O'Hara, his moment came on Okinawa. His unit was advancing up a ridge honeycombed with caves. The pre-assault bombardment had made the hill look like a moonscape, but as they moved up, deadly fire began to pour from hidden apertures. It was Little Japan, transplanted to the Pacific with live ammunition. But Billy's eyes knew what to look for. He spotted a faint, straight shadow under a mat of torn vines, a firing slit. He directed a bazooka team onto it. He identified a likely tunnel entrance from the pattern of scrub growth and called for a flamethrower. His platoon suffered casualties, but they advanced where others might have been pinned down and annihilated. The training had not made him fearless, but it had made him effective. It had turned the amorphous terror of the jungle into a series of identifiable, solvable problems. After the war, the mock-ups were largely abandoned. The plaster of Little Germany cracked and faded under the Mojave sun. The jungle of Puerto Rico quickly reclaimed its bunkers and trenches. They were temporary monuments to a very specific kind of preparation. But their legacy endured. The concept of immersive, realistic training of fighting a rehearsal war before the real one became a cornerstone of modern military doctrine. The mock-ups of World War II were the direct ancestors of the Hogan's Alleys used by police and special forces, the elaborate urban combat training centers at modern bases, and the virtual reality simulators of today. They proved that in modern warfare, victory depended not just on courage and industry, but on the ability to anticipate the very texture of the battlefield, to walk the streets of a German town or the trails of a Pacific island before a single soldier set foot there. They were theaters of the imagination where America rehearsed its nightmares, so that its sons, when they finally faced the real thing, would not be encountering the unknown, but confronting a dreadful, familiar foe whose secrets they had already learned, at great cost, in the safety of home.